My name is Alden Picard. I work for the North Carolina Wildlife Federation. I'm a conservation coordinator. So I work with our community wildlife chapters, volunteers, and community partners in the Piedmont and mountain areas of our great state of North Carolina. So again, thanks for coming. And if you don't mind, go ahead and put in the chat where you are tuning in from tonight, just because I know there's folks from all across the state with us this evening. So go ahead and share if you'd like where you're tuning in from this evening. And while you're doing that, just want to give you a quick intro to the North Carolina Wildlife Federation. So I have my screen shared over here. We've been protecting, conserving, and restoring wildlife and habitat in North Carolina since 1945. Um, and wildlife meaning all flora and fauna. So any native wildlife, flora and fauna. That's the work that we do here in North Carolina. And one of the biggest ways we get that work done is through our community wildlife chapters. And this is going to be a network of community organizations that are led by wildlife enthusiasts, hunters, fishers, birders, paddlers, pollinator enthusiasts, anyone with any interest in wildlife. We're all inclusive. Um, they create their local chapters that are affiliates of the North Carolina Wildlife Federation to put on programs, put plants in the ground, clean up litter, remove invasive plants and everything. So I think we have 19 chapters across the state. And tonight we're joining in. This program is hosted by our Union County Wildlife chapter. So this is just a taste of some of our local chapters. And tonight, oh, I don't see Union County Wildlife's logo
Or
right
is it
here.
we're down at the very bottom? Yep.
Oh yeah. Okay, here it is, the little box turtle. That's right. So there's very likely that there is a chapter in your area. If you want to get involved to put on programs like this or organize litter sweeps or pollinator plantings, whether it's with Union County or Charlotte or Wilmington or Columbus County. We do have chapters all over the state. So feel free to explore our website or reach out to me directly, and I can help you get connected with those wildlife chapters and networks in your area. So we do have Brianna Walker here from our Union County Wildlife chapter. She is the president and leader of Union County Wildlife. So I'll let her introduce herself, and she's going to share some events upcoming, and I'll pull them up on the screen. So go ahead, Brianna.
All right. Good evening, everyone. I'm Brianna Walker. I'm with the Union County Wildlife Chapter. We have been a chapter for about 7 years now. We're a pretty small chapter. So if you're in the Monroe area and you're interested, we meet the second Thursday of each month at 6:30. Sometimes we meet virtually like this, but usually we are at the Union County Agricultural Center. We also do some special events. And so this Saturday, we have a guided bird walk at the PD National Wildlife Refuge in Wadesboro. It's about depending on where you are in the county, anywhere from an hour and 15 minutes to about 40-minute drive. Lots of bird species there. I was out there on Tuesday and it was awesome. So, really looking forward to that. If you want to register, you can go on the NC Wildlife Federation page to do that. Next month,
Yeah, I'm scrolling because we have so many events across the state. Next one, here it is. This is going
um,
to be a great program, Brianna.
yeah, so our next presentation next month is about civic engagement and conservation at the local level. We actually have the mayor of Mineral Springs who is coming to do the presentation, but we're going to have county officials as well as members of the NC Wildlife Federation staff who are going to answer questions and hold a panel so that you can learn more about how you can get involved in conservation and conservation efforts. So that will be at the Union County Agricultural Center in Monroe. And then, so that is November 14th, second Thursday. And then November 16th, the following Saturday, we are doing a fall litter sweep. So we will be picking up trash in Union County. We like to do these litter sweeps a couple times a year, and they are part of the Clean and Green program, formerly known as the Trees for Trash program. So as we pick up trash, later on we can plant trees, and that's something that the NC Wildlife Federation handles. But we will be picking up trash kind of at the border of North Carolina and South Carolina, between or just north of Pageland. And you'll get more details if you register for that event. And I think
Okay.
that's it.
Yeah, I'll stop sharing. Yep. Thank you.
And so this evening, our presentation is from Kyra Bartow. I know Kyra as the president of EENC, the Environmental Educators of North Carolina, but she also works for the Museum of Natural Sciences at, let me see if I get this right, the Prairie Ridge oh no, Kyra, I'm going to mess it up.
Yes.
Eco Station. Okay.
Got it.
So go, if you're in that area, go see Kyra at Prairie Ridge. But tonight she will be doing a presentation on the virtues of vultures. So I will turn that over to her to let her get started.
All right. Thank you, Brianna. I'm excited to be here today. Just a little bit more about like why I'm talking about vultures today. I'm a huge bird nerd, love birds, have always loved birds, and vultures have a special place in my heart. I have worked with vultures at Pine Knoll Shores Aquarium, both turkey and black vultures, and we'll get a chance to talk a little bit more about those species later in the talk. And I also, through my grad school work, I have studied vultures in a couple different capacities and looking at incorporating empathy into vulture conservation and looking at how people perceive vulture deterrence. So I'm not a total expert on vultures. I'm just a vulture enthusiast, and I'm here to just tell you about them a little bit. And we're going to be looking at vultures from around the world, so not just in North America. So to get us started today, I'm going to ask for a little bit of audience participation here. And I'm going to ask you to, in the chat, just put up some words. What comes to mind when you think of vultures? All right, so I'm seeing some good words in here that are popping up. They're big birds, cleanup crew, cleaning up, reduce pathogens. Ooh, all of you are way ahead of the curve so far. Cleaning up the trash. You are all vulture enthusiasts. I see. Ooh, kettling. Good word. Useful. Love it. Important scavengers. Okay, so I think all of you are, it sounds like, some vulture enthusiasts. So a little bit different than what we would typically see in the standard of the public. If you ask the public what they would think of when they think of vultures. Unfortunately, most of the time in our society, vultures are portrayed as like harbingers of death. They're often associated with villains or lawyers being vultures or things like that that we don't necessarily have positive connotations with. Oftentimes they're also seen as gross or ugly and opportunistic. I love the words that you guys put in there much more, and they are more accurate. So as part of my graduate studies, one of the things I did was a public survey asking that same question. And when I did that, these are the words that like showed up. So the bigger the word is, the more it was said. So people do realize that that they are scavengers, which is really good. Very important part of vultures in our ecosystems. But if you look at those words, there's a lot of kind of mixed messaging in there. Some of it's great, some of it's not so great. Talking about scary, scrappy, swooping, attacking, all sorts of things like that. But then we also have the cleanup crew, necessary, that they are helpful, majestic. So there's a lot of mixed messaging going on with vultures. Today, I'm hopeful that by the end of our talk, our time together, you only think of those really good things because vultures are awesome and we need them. So we're going to dive into learning a little bit more about vultures of the world. And to do that, before we do, first we have to know what makes a vulture a vulture. So the first thing is that they have long hooked bills that are designed for tearing food. So this is true of raptors in general. So sometimes if you ask people to define raptors, sometimes vultures are included, sometimes they are not. But they do share this same characteristic with raptors in that their beaks are long, curved, and designed for tearing and ripping meat. But what makes them a little bit more separate from a lot of other raptors, and this is not always true, but a majority of vultures lack feathering on their heads, and we'll talk about why that is a little bit later. This one is true of all vultures. They lack powerful feet characteristic of other raptors like eagles, hawks, and owls and falcons, because they are not going to be killing their food with their feet. Their food's typically already dead, so they don't need that really strong power or grip strength that the other raptors have, and they're also not carrying it. Typically, they are eating it where they find it, so they don't need that kind of foot strength that those other raptors have. And then, as I mentioned, they're mostly scavengers. Now, this is not true of all vultures, and we're going to talk about a couple of them because they're super cool, but most vultures are scavengers. And most of them are actually obligate scavengers, which means that's the only thing they eat are dead things that they find. They're not going to be kind of supplementing that diet with other things, but that's not true for all of them, but a majority of them are obligate scavengers. Now, when we look at vultures in our world, we split them up into two main categories. And these two main categories are old world vultures and new world vultures. So old world vultures are the ones that are found in Europe, Asia, and Africa. And those are going to be in the family that we call Accipitiridae, which is in the same family as hawks, eagles, and kites. So kind of similar in that raptor group there that we were talking about. Within that Accipitiridae family, they have 9 genera within that family, and there are 16 species in the old world group. Most of those species, unfortunately, are threatened somehow. So most all of the threatened kind of labels that I'm going to be talking about come from the IUCN, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. They are the ones that kind of put out national guidelines as to whether an animal is considered threatened to endangered to extinct. And the least concern is the best one, the one that's not going to be concerning, as the name suggests. And then it goes to near threatened, threatened, endangered, critically endangered, extinct in the wild, extinct. So a majority of the old world vultures are actually in the critically endangered to endangered realm, and we'll talk about why in a little bit too. But there are there are actually only 2 species of the 16 species that are least concerned. The rest of them are either near threatened to critically endangered. Kind of opposite of that, the new world vultures are going to be the vultures that we are most familiar with in North America because they're in North and South America, and they are in a completely different family. So they're not in the same family as other raptors in that Accipitiridae. These guys are in the family called Cathartidae, and they have 5 genera and 7 species found in the Americas, and only 2 of those 7 species are in that kind of danger area, with California condors being critically endangered and Andean condors being vulnerable. So the rest of them are least concern, which is very different than the old world species. Now, when we're going to dive into why these guys are separate from each other a little bit, and this is really an interesting story because it has changed quite a bit as scientists have learned more and more about vultures. It used to be thought that vultures were like their own category. Then they used to think that vultures were going to be in the same family as storks, which is the Ciconidae, which isn't on this category, this branch here that we're seeing. And then recent DNA has shown us that they are actually more closely looped in with the this kind of category here, which is closer to kingfishers, the Carassiformes, and owls, Strigiformes, than they are to falcons. Falcons are completely different family, different categories, so they're not in the same realm, even though falcons are raptors that are grouped in with Accipitiridae and Strigiformes. They still have a very different, distinct family or ancestral history there. And This is still something that we're still learning a lot about. So we're still kind of figuring out where vultures fall on the evolutionary tree. But our current understanding is that the old world vultures are the ones in the accipitiformes, and our new world vultures are the ones in the cathartiformes. And I was saying accipitiridae and cathartidae. It's a different term in there that's similar as well. So that's kind of a little bit of a history of why we have old world and new world vultures. Are there any questions that people have? If you have questions, you can type them in the chat, or if you have the power, feel free to unmute yourself and just shout it out before we move into looking at species on their own.
And if you do have a question, you can raise your hand if you look at
Yes,
the
thank
bottom
you.
of the screen. Yeah, you're welcome. Where it says chat, right next to that is you should be able to raise your hand and we can unmute you.
Yes.
Or of course put it in the chat.
Yeah. Feel free to put them in there and I can stop and answer those questions too, but I'm gonna go ahead and move on. But oh, is there a question? I feel like I saw there's one in the Q&A.
Oh yeah.
Okay, yes. So didn't catch the difference between old world and new world vultures. Yes. So old world vultures actually with DNA studies are in a completely different family from new world vultures. Old world are going to be in the Europe, Africa, and Asia, and new world are going to be in South and North America. And our old world are going to be in the family Accipitiridae, which is in the same family as eagles, kites, and hawks. And then our new world vultures have their own family, which is Cathartidae. So they're not in the same family as hawks and eagles and falcons and or kites. And so that is kind of a very distinct differentiation between those two groups, evolutionarily speaking. All right. All right, so I wish we had time today to talk about all the species of vultures because there are so many unique vultures and they all have really cool things going on with them, but we don't. So I'm going to quickly show you pictures of all the species so you can just have an idea of what they are. And then we're going to highlight a couple of the species of old world vultures and talk about how cool they are. And then we're going to highlight a couple of the new world vultures and do the same thing. So first, old world vultures. Here we go. If my mouse will work. Go, there we go. All right, so this is the palm nut vulture, which is one of our few vultures that does not have the bear head. We are going to talk about that one later. Another one that does not have the bear head is our bearded vulture. Then we have Egyptian vulture, red-headed, white-headed, cinereous, lapit-faced, hooded, white-backed, white-rumped, Indian, slender-billed, Rupal's griffin, Himalayan griffin, Eurasian griffin, and Cape griffin. So those are all of our old world species. And we are going to, like I said, I just picked a couple that we're going to talk a little bit more about so that we can learn some really cool things about them. They all have really neat things. So if we have time at the end, I can share some other things. But the first one that I want to highlight is called the Rupal's Griffin Vulture. And there are some names that in some of these are called griffin and some of them are condors. Griffin and vultures are just, or griffin and condors are just different names for large vultures. So griffins typically are larger. So our Rupal's Griffin vulture is found in the region of like kind of middle part of Africa. And they are critically endangered. So 97% of their population has declined since 1990. So they are almost completely extinct, which is very sad. Their primary threats, the reason that they are declining so quickly, is because of poisoning in two different formats. So there's poisoning that's intentional and unintentional. So our intentional poisoning is belief-based. For these vultures in this region, there are a lot of cultures that believe that vultures are harbingers of death and that they can actually bring disease and all sorts of things. So they intentionally poison vultures by poisoning the carcasses that they are eating so that they are not around their areas, and so that they don't bring the death into their regions. They also are poisoned intentionally because they're using body parts from vultures in medicinal practices. And so they are killing them to gather them for the medicinal use. And then there's the unintentional poisoning, and these are called poison baits. So unintentional poisoning is that there are a lot of poaching, and there's other kinds of like illegal activity with larger predators in that region, and larger charismatic animals like elephants, the lions in the region, things like that, where poachers are trying to either get the ivory from the elephants or just get game that are protected. And vultures are going to be finding the leftover carcasses or the leftover meat parts to eat, and these vultures will come in huge groups, and so they find the carcasses quickly after they have been killed and left, and they come in really big groups, so rangers can actually follow the vultures to where the kills are, and they can catch poachers. So to prevent that from happening, because they'll often like be circling around, they will poison the carcasses that are left, and then they are killing all of the vultures so that they are not giving away their location. So that one's actually more intentional. The unintentional side of it is when some prey that are dying, like cattle and other livestock, the farmers will often poison them to keep away things like lions. But in the meantime, they also poison vultures and kill vultures too. So there's intentional and unintentional poisoning for lots of different reasons, but those poisonings are catastrophic for vultures because they do come in hundreds to eat on something. So you can kill hundreds of vultures at once from poisoning the carcasses that they are consuming. Now, to get out of the gloom and doom a little bit, some fun facts about our Rupal's vulture, like why do we love them? One is because this is actually the highest flying bird in the entire world. They can fly 36,000 feet, which is as high as airplanes go. So it's extremely high, and that's as high as they've been recorded. It's possible that they're going higher than that. Unfortunately, they found that out because it ran into a plane at one point at that height. But they've done some research on how they are able to fly that high, because oxygen levels at that height are super like bare minimum, and they're not sure how they're still flying. So research has looked into that and has found that they have an altered protein that allows them to kind of process oxygen at a higher level, so they can still fly and breathe with low pressure and with low oxygen levels at that point. Now, the reason they want to go that high is because they can travel extremely far distances when they go high. So every mile that vultures go up in the sky, they can soar for 5 miles without flapping. So they're conserving a lot of energy by doing that. And so oftentimes they're going to be following thermals up in the sky, and then those thermals make it so they don't have to flap very much either. So they're conserving energy on the way up, and then as every mile they go up, they are able to travel further without using as much energy either. So they're not going that high to be able to look for food, but they are going that high to help them travel, so they can get from place to place without expending a lot of energy. And then they do have really good eyesight. They're actually going to be using their eyesight to hunt more than their sense of smell, but they also do have a sense of smell that they utilize for that too. Does anybody have any questions about the Rupal Griffin before we move on to our next vulture species? Feel free to pop it in there and I can stop and come back, but I'm gonna keep on going because we got a lot of vultures I want to talk about. This is probably my favorite vulture in the world, which is the bearded vulture, also called the lammergeier. I love a lot of vultures though, so you might hear me say that more than once. They get the name bearded because of that kind of like mustache looking feather structure that they have on their beak. Looks a little bit like a beard that it hangs down there. And this is one of the vultures that I was mentioning that has the feathered head, and that's actually because of their diet. So we're going to talk about that in a moment. But first, these guys are near threatened. So they're actually one of the old world vultures that is doing better than a lot of the others. And this also is going to have to do with their diet. And we'll get into that a little bit later too. But they are still, their populations are still decreasing. So it is still something that we want to try and watch for. But these guys are found in a lot more places, just kind of spotty. So they're found throughout different spots of Africa, Europe, and mostly through Asia is where the biggest populations are of this species. And they like to be in kind of rocky, mountainous areas. And so they are actually considered, they are the largest bird in the Alps, which is pretty cool. But I mentioned their diet is unique, and that's why they have the feathers on their head. And it is because most of their diet is actually bone. So they are eating, their diet is dominated by 70 to 90% of just bones and bone marrow. So they are not eating the flesh off of the animals that are left over. They are actually letting other vultures and other decomposers take care of that, and then they come in and eat the bones afterwards. So they've also been observed eating like owl pellets to obtain the bones within the owl pellets. And what they do is they typically swallow bones whole, if they're small enough. If they're not, this comic kind of shows you what they do. They take up the bones really high, not with their wings, but in their beaks typically, and they drop them on rocks, which is like why they want to be in rocky areas, to break them into small enough pieces so that they can eat the small pieces and so they can get to the bone marrow within, which I think is just super cool. They also, you might have noticed, I'm going to go back a slide real quick. They have this orange color on their feathers. They do have kind of like, if you look near the top of the head, that's more the natural color of the feathers. This orange color actually comes from, they will paint themselves with mud. And that is supposed to be impressive to the ladies, but it also helps them to keep kind of bugs off of them. It cleans them a little bit. So they paint themselves with mud, and they specifically want that red color. And it makes them look more intense, I guess. We're not entirely sure why yet. So scientists are still looking into why our bearded vulture friends do that, but it's super cool. All right, does anybody have any questions about our bearded vulture? It is very cool. I agree. All right. Our next vulture is another one that's a little bit strange. This is our palm nut vulture that I mentioned. It was one of the first old world vultures on our list, and it is the other vulture that does not have the bare head. And now the reason that they don't have that bare head is again because of their diet. Most vultures want that bare head because they are sticking their heads into carcasses and they are pulling, and they don't want all of the blood and guts all over their head. So it's easier to clean themselves off and clean those feathers when they don't have a lot of feathers on their head. But this one's not eating carcasses. It's actually one of our vultures that is not a obligate scavenger. These guys actually eat mostly palm fruits, which is where they get the name palm nut vulture from. And because their diet is so different, they are also not persecuted nearly as much as other vultures are. So they are least concern and their populations are stable. They are found in Africa as well, middle to southern parts of Africa. And they are, when they're adults, about 58 to 65% of their diet's going to be palm nuts. They also will eat other like carrion and dead things that they can find. They'll also eat some small vertebrates like lizards and snakes if they can catch them. So they're kind of like a weird mix between vultures and like a hawk species, but they still don't have the grip strength in their feet. So they're using their beak to catch most of the food that they are catching. Juvenile palm nuts vultures will actually have 92% of their diet will just be palm fruits. So they are typically going to be looking at that palm fruit, and they don't get poisoned because of that. They're not going to be poisoned from the carcasses like we talked about the Rupal Griffin vulture. So they are unlikely to come into contact with things other than maybe pesticides. That's like their biggest concern, are pesticides that are put on the palm nuts that they are eating. But they typically have more of a vegetarian diet, which is pretty interesting for a vulture species. If you have any questions, pop them in. I'm going to keep going so we have enough time to talk about all the things today. This is probably my second favorite vulture species. This is the Lapit-faced vulture. They are huge. These guys are the big vultures that a lot of other vultures and a lot of other animals wait for them to come in because they have the thickest beaks to be able to rip into an animal's hide and to rip through muscles that other birds and other scavengers might not be able to get through. So these guys are like the ones that get there first and get to rip into the animals because of that big, strong beak that they have. They are found again throughout Africa and a little bit into Asia, but they're very spotty throughout there. And the reason for that kind of spottiness is because of they are endangered. So their populations used to be spread out more and it used to be more connected, but this is where they've been extirpated out of a lot of those areas. And so these are the remaining pockets of their populations. And they're named Lapit-faced vultures because if you look at their heads and their necks, they kind of have these fleshy folds on the sides of their neck, and those are called lappets. So that's why they are Lapit-faced vultures. And then their populations, I mentioned that they are endangered. Their populations have declined 80%. So not quite as steep as our Rupal Griffin, that was 97%. But these guys are 80% decline since 1990, and it's continuing to decline. So it is an area of concern. And similar to our Rupal Griffin, their main threat is going to be unintentional baited poisoning, which is the same thing as like trying to keep away large predators from livestock that might have died. And then also sentinel poisoning. And sentinel poisoning is that poisoning that is to stop vultures from showing the location of poachers. And since these are the vultures that typically get there first, they are the ones that are most impacted by the sentinel poisoning that occurs. The other big issue for these guys is electrocution on energy infrastructure. There's a lot of energy infrastructure happening across Africa, and it has not really given a lot of birds time to adjust to it. And oftentimes they will be electrocuted from the kind of sometimes more crude electronic structures that are in the area. Now, these guys, even though they have super big beaks that are going to help them rip and tear into dead animals, they also will eat insects. So they will also eat termites, locusts, and small mammals and reptiles. So they're not one of our obligate scavengers, but that is their primary diet source, is going to be through scavenging. All right, that's our Lapit-faced. Again, if questions, pop them in the chat or in the Q&A, and I will answer them as I see them pop up. Now, this one is really interesting. This one, interesting kind of in a sad way. This is the last old world vulture that I want to focus on tonight. And this is the Indian vulture. So as you can imagine, the Indian vulture is in India. And so the reason that I wanted to talk about this one is because this species is critically endangered, again, with a 97% decline in their population since 1990. And this is actually a huge case study for why vultures are so important. And that is because, and their populations are still decreasing from that 97%. So they are almost extinct. Their primary threat is actually a specific type of medicine that is given to livestock, specifically cattle, because people in India kind of revere the cattle and really respect them. They give them a type of medicine called diclofenac, which is it's a medicine that is meant to help. This is my cat Canary, excuse her. So it's a medicine that's meant to help with arthritis and swelling in joints. But what happens for vultures when they consume the livestock that has had this medicine, it causes renal failure for them. And it also causes them to have visceral gout. And it is extremely lethal to vultures. So what happened, this drug was like approved for veterinary services and for livestock, and the vultures almost disappeared overnight in India. It happened very quickly. Scientists did not really understand why they were disappearing. And because of this huge disappearance of the vultures, a lot of other problems rose up. So vultures have super acidic stomachs that can kill diseases like botulism, anthrax, tuberculosis, and some other really big doozies out there. And because of the lack of vultures, those diseases, especially tuberculosis, began to rise really quickly within India. And then they were also starting to experience some difficult kind of situations with larger predators, like our tigers, or even with jaguars that were coming to get the animals that are dead, because they are also scavengers when they can be. They're not obligate scavengers, but they will scavenge. And vultures would get rid of those carcasses before those other scavengers had a chance to. But without the vultures, more larger predators were coming in, and they were causing more human wildlife conflicts and more deaths because of those interactions as well. And then the other disease that went up because of the vulture species going down, canary, sorry, just giving you a preview of coming attractions there, is rabies. So rabies cases went really high up, especially in rabid dog species that are dogs that were in the area. And so there was just kind of like this huge cascading event of negative things because of this vulture population going down. So because of all of that stuff, scientists figured out what it was. They figured out it was diclofenac that was causing these issues for vultures to go down, and diclofenac was banned in India. Unfortunately, so it was banned in 2006, but unfortunately it's still used kind of under the table. So this is still an ongoing issue. It's not as prevalent, but it's still an issue. And then the other thing that has kind of increased or kind of maintained the issues for Indian vultures in India is that they have another drug that they tried using called meloxicam, but that also, or meloxicam, excuse me, meloxicam causes the same issues. So that was kind of a trial and error. It did not work. Thankfully, there is another drug that can do the same things for cows and is not fatal to vultures, and it is called ketoprofen. So we're trying to get that to be used a little bit more. The unfortunate thing is, other than all the other things that I mentioned, is that diclofenac and meloxicam are starting to be used in Europe, and we're starting to see the same things happen in Europe with vulture populations that we did in India. So unfortunately, we're not learning from our mistakes, and it's something that we're trying to catch up on in science instead of getting ahead of. And I did see the question in here, would I say that the species of old world vulture, the Indian vulture, is a keystone species in India? And absolutely, I definitely would. So many different things kind of cascaded in a negative way because of their population decline. That really points to their importance in the ecosystem. And that's not just true of Indian vultures, that's true of vultures kind of worldwide. This is just what shows us what happens if we lose them. Now, kind of getting out of the sad, some fun facts about our Indian vultures. They locate their food through their eyesight, not their sense of smell. So they are going to have really, really keen eyesight. They can see their prey from miles up in the sky. And so they are going to be spending a lot of time on cliffs and in mountainsides. They nest on cliff sides, and they don't reuse their nest. And I think this is kind of funny. The reason they don't reuse their nests is because as the young get older, they slowly push off all the sticks from the nest so that the nest is completely gone by the time the young are about to fledge. It's the only vulture species that does that. So it's kind of interesting that they have that kind of cleaning out their space as they get bigger. All right, I did see another question come in, so let me answer that real quick. So is it problematic to use meloxicam in wildlife rehab for the same reasons? I don't know, because I haven't done a lot of research on what the effects of meloxicam are on other animals. We know it's a problem for vultures, at least old world vultures. New world vultures are completely different in their DNA and in a lot of their internal systems, so it might not affect new world vultures the same way it does old world. But that is certainly something to keep in mind, because you don't want to have this situation with a lot of vulture species. Good question. All right, that's our last old world species before we move into our new world species. So go ahead and keep popping those questions in there. But I mentioned our new world species. We only have 7 species of new world vultures. So we have our California condor, Andean condor, king vulture, black vulture, turkey vulture, lesser yellow-headed vulture, and greater yellow-headed vulture. Our lesser and greater yellow-headed vultures pretty recently were split into 2 species. For a long time, they were thought to be the same species, but in about 2012, they were split into 2 different species. So that one is still a group that we're learning a lot more about. Now, for today, I'm going to focus on the species that we have in the United States. So we have 3 of these 7 species in the United States. We have our black vulture, turkey vulture, and the California condor. So we're going to start by talking about the turkey vulture. And our turkey vulture is found throughout most of North America and pretty much all of South America. So they are pretty far spread, and you'll see the 2 colors on that map. The purple is where they are year round, and that kind of orangish color is where they will migrate to. So some of these birds, even though you see them year round, they still migrate. So some of the vultures that you might see in North Carolina will migrate all the way down to Argentina and back up. So you're not necessarily seeing the same vultures year round. But you are going to see turkey vultures year round in this area. They are least concerned. Their populations are stable and potentially increasing. So they're doing really well in the United States, especially. And these guys are different than a lot of other vultures because of their sense of smell. You'll notice that's a really big nostril that's on that picture. And one of the cool things this picture doesn't show it, you can actually see through their nostrils. It's just this big hole in their skull, which is really crazy. And their olfactory bulb is 4 times larger than our black vultures' olfactory bulb. They can smell things that are even 6 feet underground. So they have really intense olfactory sense that allows them to, that's what they're using to find their food. They're not really using their sense of eyesight. And the reason for that is most of the old world vultures are going to be in areas that are open, and they're going to be able to see things. They don't have tree canopies that they're fighting against, but these vultures spend a lot of time in forested areas, and a lot of their food is going to be under a tree canopy. So they're not using their sense of sight to find that food. They're using their sense of smell instead. So they're actually able to detect specific molecules that come from carcasses that are decomposing from thousands of feet below themselves. That's super, super cool. And because of this, they have been able to kind of become specialists of small carrion, like squirrels or like rabbits, things like that you might see on the side of the road. You'll oftentimes see vultures next to them. and they're typically turkey vultures. One of the reasons for this is because black vultures, which we'll get to in a moment, are much more aggressive than turkey vultures, and turkey vultures are the ones who find the food. The black vultures follow the turkey vultures and then they scare them away. So turkey vultures have gotten to the point where they've learned to find small things and eat it all as fast as they can before the black vultures get there, so that they don't have to give away the food that they found. So they've kind of become that specialized in what they're eating. I did see a question come in. Oh, why do many people call vultures buzzards? This is a very fascinating question. And the answer actually goes back to colonialism. And it's because in Europe, hawks are actually called buzzards. So buzzards are hawks, not vultures. And so when people came over to North America, they saw vultures and thought that they were hawks. And so they called them buzzards. And it just kind of stuck even after they found out that they were not correct. So buzzards are not vultures. They are a type of hawk. So if you go to Europe, even now, there's a lot of birds that are called buzzards that are hawks and not vultures. Good question. All right. Back into our turkey vulture. So there's a lot of really cool things, fun facts about our turkey vulture friends. I just really like this comic. It's from Rosemary Moscow. If you know her, she has a lot of really cool things. But their olfactory power is so strong, and they have this very specific smell that they go after that they've actually been used to help find natural gas leaks. So people can pump the smell of carcasses into the pipes, and then vultures will circle around where the natural gas leak is, and then they know where they can fix it, which is pretty cool. They also have a really crazy defense mechanism, and that's what this comic kind of refers to in one way, and that is projectile vomiting. So if they are scared, and oftentimes I mentioned they will scarf down their food really fast, so they have all their food in their crop. And if they are scared away from something, they will projectile vomit onto the predator or whatever scares them for two reasons. One, that's disgusting, and it keeps the things away from them. It smells bad. It's acidic, so it's potentially going to burn the animal too, because they have an acidic stomach that is lower than a 1 on the pH scale. It's super, super acidic. And two, it helps them be lighter so they can fly away faster. So that's one of their defenses, and they will also do that when they are young. So if you ever come across young turkey vultures, definitely leave them alone because you don't want to be vomited on. The other cool thing that they do is mentioned in this comic as well, is to keep cool. I poop on my legs and feet. That is true. It is called urohydrosis. And these birds, they poop and pee at the same time. So they have the urate, which is the white portion of the scat. And then they have the actual feces, which is the black or colored portion. And so they typically, urohydrosis is mostly going to be the urate that they put on their feet, on their legs. And it both kills bacteria on their feet because their urine is pretty much straight uric acid. And it also cools them down at the same time by evaporating, just like sweat does for us. They can't sweat. So this is kind of their invented sweat version, which is cool. And then the last thing you might notice these guys out and about on like a telephone pole or on a roof with their wings outstretched, that is called the heraldic pose. And that is how they warm themselves up. And also they will kind of bake their feathers to kill bacteria in the warm sun at the same time, which is pretty cool. They also use that to dry off if they get wet. It's called a heraldic pose, Horaltic. Heraldic. Yeah. All right. So that's our turkey vulture friend. So I'm going to move into our black vulture now. Also very cool. They are found throughout most of South America and a lot of North America. Their populations are increasing and they are spreading. So this map might not be accurate anymore. I got this map 2 years ago, I think. Or it was published 2 years ago. So this might not be accurate. It's definitely, they're expanding into Canada now too. And there are some positives and negatives to that, but they are also of least concern and their populations are increasing. So there are some good things with that, but also some negatives, which we'll talk about as well. So as I mentioned with the turkey vulture, they do not use their sense of smell. You can see they have much, much smaller nostrils than our turkey vulture did. And they are typically following turkey vultures to their food, to the food source. They're much more aggressive than turkey vultures. And so they will kind of scare the turkey vultures away and they will eat them. They also typically are going to be in more groups. Turkey vultures tend to be more solitary when they are hunting, at least. And then our black vultures oftentimes will be in really big groups. So that's another reason turkey vultures get scared away, is because a lot of them will scare them away at once. There's another thing, that these guys are not necessarily obligate scavengers. There have been some cases recorded of them killing their food. Specifically cattle. They will kill cattle that are vulnerable, sick, or that are giving birth. They really like to eat placenta. So they will eat the placenta of the calf that is being birthed. And then they will also sometimes kill the calf and kill the mother. It's pretty brutal because they will swarm and they don't have talons. So they are biting, twisting, and pulling until the animal pretty much bleeds out. So it is not something that has a lot of data behind it on how often this happens, but because it has happened before, a lot of farmers are not super happy about having black vultures around, and they want to keep them away from their livestock for a lot of persecuted reasons there. I think some of it's accurate, but some of it is, from what data is coming out, is over exaggerated, in that they tend to be there after the animal dies and they are often blamed for that death, but they still have done it occasionally. Now they also are communal roosters. So they will group with turkey vultures as well in those roosts, but these roosts can often have they've been recorded up to 4,000 of these vultures all in the one location, but typically are more between 500 and 300 is more common. And what happens in these roosts is they are resting together at night, but these vultures are super smart. A lot of vultures have the intelligence level of about a 4-year-old child. And so they get bored. And what they do is they will play with things, they'll destroy things, they'll rip things up. So another reason people don't necessarily love vultures is sometimes they're pulling roofing tiles off of roofs. They'll pull the rubber off of windshield wipers. They'll kind of destroy boats. They do a lot of crazy stuff because they're basically toddlers who want to explore the world with their mouth by destroying it. So there's a lot of conflicting feelings about vultures because of that. If you're one of the people who've experienced it, it's not the best. But they're just curious. They're learning. And there are ways that we can prevent them from doing some of those things too. All right. So since these two are the most common that we would see, just a little bit about how you would identify these guys. So our turkey vultures are going to they're going to fly in a V shape, and they have that kind of like tan white from the tips of their feathers all the way to their body. Their tail is also much longer and always kind of sticks out. And then when they're flying, and they also are going to kind of wobble a little bit because they are specialized to fly low so that they can smell their food, and they are wobbling to kind of adjust to air currents so they don't have to flap as much. Our black vultures, on the other hand, have really broad wings with silvery tips on the ends of their wings, and their tail is much shorter and oftentimes even blends in with their wings so that you can't really necessarily see that tail sticking straight out. They also flap a lot more shallow beats in their flight. Now you'll also notice that our turkey vulture has the red head and the black vulture has the black head, but young turkey vultures also have a gray head. So the way you can tell young turkey vultures apart is by looking at that tip of the beak. The tip of the beak is always going to be an ivory color, but it gets whiter as the turkey vulture gets older. So it won't be quite this bright white, but that's still a good way to tell. All right, cool. So that's how you can, another thing to tell about them is that they're a little bit different in size. Black vultures are slightly smaller than turkey vultures. Turkey vultures have about a 6-foot wingspan, where black vultures are about 5.5. But that's tough to tell unless you're seeing them right next to each other. Alrighty, so last one in America is our California condor. And our California condor is the largest of the North American vultures. It's also currently the largest soaring land bird on the continent. So back in the Pleistocene age, teratons were much larger than our California condors, but currently they are the largest in North America, in the continent in North America. These guys are obligate scavengers. They exclusively eat carrion, which is one of the issues that they are having. And you'll see they have pretty small range in those areas in the United States and then into Baja California in Mexico. And they are highly social when they eat. So they eat in groups, but they have lots of kind of unique things that are very different from black vultures and turkey vultures. They're superficially very similar, which means they look very similar and they kind of act very similar to our old world vultures. They have similar foot structures. They have the unfeathered heads and necks. They also feed young through regurgitation, which is similar to our old world vultures. And one of the cool things about them is that they have equal nesting duties between males and females. But unlike griffins in the old world, which they are similar to, they don't build substantial nests and they rely on natural cave structures for their nesting. They have single eggs in their clutches, and it takes a minimum of 6 years for one of these birds to reach sexual maturity, which is why they are critically endangered and why it's so crucial for us to be protecting them in a lot of ways, because it takes a long time for them to grow up and to have young. And when they do have young, they only have one at a time. And so in the mid 1980s, there were only 27 California condors left in the whole world. And they were captured to start a reintroduction program. And it's been underway since 1992. Luckily, that reintroduction has been successful for the most part, but they're still not considered self-sustaining, largely because they are still facing lead poisoning issues. So we mentioned poisoning for the old world vultures, but that's very different poisoning than our California condors face. Theirs is lead poisoning. So they're getting lead poisoning because they are only eating carrion, which are shot with lead bullets. And when lead hits an animal, it scatters. And so when hunters then skin the animal and take it away, they leave stuff that has lead in it, and that's what our condors are eating. And they don't need to eat a lot for them to be completely poisoned by it and to die. So easy thing that we can do is to switch lead bullets with copper bullets instead. Just as effective and much less dangerous for humans and for our condor friends and other animals too. So luckily, as of December 2021, 537 California condors exist in the world. 334 of them were in the wild, with 203 being in captivity. So I've mentioned this throughout the talk, and I know we're running out of time, so I'm going to go quickly. But why do we need vultures? They are our cleanup crew. So I mentioned that they reduce our pathogens in our environment, and for us, they also will reduce the amount of food available for other scavengers that we don't want around, like rodents, stray dogs, large cats, jaguars, things like that. Not jaguars here, but throughout the world. They also will help with nutrient cycling. So they travel over 125 miles a day, and they spread nutrients over that wide area in the process. So along with the disease control, cleanup crew, they are also helping to keep our environments and ecosystems nice and clean. So primary dangers that these guys face, I did mention these, but all vultures are going to face the poisoning issues, lots of different potential poisoning issues. We also have electrocution. There's lots of potential wind energy turbine issues. People, for a lot of reasons, human disturbance, poaching, habitat degradation, livestock protection, nest disturbance, and then collision with airlines. So in Africa specifically, they're going to be facing poison issues with the baiting, leaf-based, and sentinel poisoning, habitat degradation from people, decline in food availability because of people, and belief-based traditional medicine practices. And then in Asia and Europe, you're going to be facing poisoning from diclofenac and human disturbances such as habitat degradation and livestock production. And then they're also going to be having issues with collisions with vehicles and airplanes. And then in America, the main issues are lead poisoning, and then trapping and shooting from humans because they just don't like them. And then they also are going to have issues with roosting disturbance because people don't like them destroying things like I was talking about. And then they also are going to have issues with collisions with planes and with vehicles. So turkey vultures are considered the single biggest threat for military aircraft. And for collisions, as far as birds go. It's a major issue for the US Air Force, costing $21.6 million, 3 crashed aircrafts and 2 fatalities from 1989 to 1992. So a lot of military and airports are trying to figure out ways to deter vultures so that they can prevent those types of collisions happening. Black vultures a little bit less of an issue. They're the 3rd biggest hazard for military aircraft, so it's still an issue, but not quite as big of an issue. All right, so how can you help our vulture friends? There's lots of cool things you can do. One, tell people how awesome vultures are. They are fantastic. There's so many cool things about them. You can also support AZA facilities. AZA is the Association for Zoos and Aquariums. Not all zoos and aquariums are created equal, but AZA institutions are going to be institutions that pass high standards for care and for conservation. So there is an organization or a factor of that called Saving Animals from Extinction, and they have an African vulture section where they are going to be working like the Denver Zoo, the North Carolina Zoo, all have partnerships with organizations in Africa to do research and education, and satellite telemetry, ranger training to reduce poisonings, all sorts of things that they're trying to do to prevent the vultures from going extinct in Africa. So visiting those institutions actually help to contribute money to those conservation initiatives. As I mentioned, use lead-free bullets if you are a hunter, or convince your hunter friends to switch to lead-free bullets. Copper bullets are a great alternative. And then you can also celebrate Vulture Awareness Day. We're a little late. International Vulture Awareness Day is the first Saturday of every September of the year. And so there's lots of really cool things. There are zoos and institutions around that do fun things. You can celebrate it yourself, and you can also tell your local government about your commitment to vultures, and have them pass laws that protect our vulture species. I know that was a lot of information. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you for having me. Are there any questions? I saw somebody. I would love to see your pictures of vultures. Yes.
And if y'all want to ask your questions out loud, we could raise your hand.
Yeah.
YouTube, if you want to speak directly. I was also going to add to the other things you could do at the end is, this might seem cliche and simple, but, and most people on this call probably don't do this, but don't throw your banana peels and apple cores and anything, to the side of the road, because that attracts animals.
Yes.
And predators, and that get hit, and then you have vultures on the road, and
yep, and then they get hit. Yes. That's an excellent point.
So Kyra, I actually had a question.
Please.
The palm nut vultures, are they the only omnivores? Do other vultures sometimes? I know you mentioned a lot.
So I believe that they are the only omnivores, if I remember correctly. There are several other vultures who will eat small vertebrates or invertebrates, but I believe they're the only ones that are omnivores. So, good question.
That's super cool.
Yeah.
Jeff, I'm gonna go ahead and unmute you so we can try to figure out what you'd like to do with this photo. If you'd like to talk, I went ahead and unmuted you.
I'm also quick.
Also, Jeff, if you have a photo, you could send me the photo, and I'll put it in the follow-up email if you have a photo that you want to go out.
Ooh, that's a good question about bird flu. So I haven't read a lot of research about the bird flu, how it has impacted vulture species. I know it's been a huge issue for birds in general, and so I'm sure that's, like you said, still impacting vulture populations, but I don't know on the whole, like what the vulture populations look like because of that. That's an interesting question to look into. Definitely something to keep in mind.
Can you send me your email
Sure thing.
or post it here, and then I'll send you the pictures from my trip to India, where I visited a carcass dump and saw
Cool.
probably 7,000 to 8,000 Egyptian vultures.
Wow.
And then there was 2 species of griffin vultures, and I saw one Cineus vulture, which is in this picture. And later
Awesome.
that day,
Love
we
those
saw
guys.
the red-headed vulture. So
Wow. I'm
plus
jealous.
plus a lot of dogs. And you talk about
Mhm.
there was an article that I received an email about the disease spreading in India
Yes.
from the decline of the vultures
Mhm.
in India. And they even say that because of the decline of the vultures, it is attributed to the death of over 500,000 people within so many
Yep.
years because of the spread of the diseases from the
Yeah.
vultures dying out.
Yeah. It's very sad. So it's definitely something we need to give some attention to.
Yeah, and turkey vulture is my favorite bird. And if I believed in reincarnation, I would love to come back as a turkey vulture.
I love that.
Because I used to fly, and I love watching them flying around with very
Very
little
cool.
effort. And people
Mhm.
said, "Yeah, Jeff, think what to eat." I said, "Yeah, they get to eat all the red meat they want to, and nobody tells them it's bad for them."
Very true.
But if you send me your email address or post it here, I can send you
I
my
sent it
pictures
to you
and
in the
post it.
chat, Jeff.
What's that?
Yeah.
I sent it to you in the chat, a person in a message,
Mhm.
but I'll post it here for everyone too.
How
Thank
do
you.
you get to that then?
Go to the bottom of your screen and you'll
Okay.
see where it says chat on the bottom, participants, chat, raise hand.
Yeah, I got that open, but I don't see. I don't see the.
You also have my email because when you register for this program,
Oh,
confirmation.
I see it now.
Okay, great. Thank you,
Okay.
Joe.
Okay. I'll send you the picture then.
Thank you.
Okay. I enjoyed the program.
Glad you did. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Oh, is there a reason why seems to be more vultures soaring on windy days? So I don't know this like with scientific backing, but I have a couple theories. One is that I think that vultures are just having fun in the wind and birds in general. Two, I think it actually helps them to they can smell within the wind better. So they might be easy, it might be easier for them to find their food that way. And three, I also think it helps them to soar easier in some instances. It depends on how strong the wind is. But those are my guesses, educated guesses. I don't have scientific backing for that, but yeah. Oh, how big is the Lapit face vulture compared to the turkey vulture? So turkey vulture is 6 feet in wingspan. The Lapit face vulture, I'm trying to remember. See if I have it in my notes here. Oh, yes. It is between 8 and 9.5 feet. So it's at least 2 feet larger, sometimes 3.5 feet larger than our turkey vultures. So quite big.
Yeah, and this recording will be sent out in the follow-up email to everyone registered. So even those folks that weren't able to tune in tonight will receive the recording. I do have a question for you, Kyra,
Yes.
and or maybe a comment for you to speak on.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what do you know about the interaction of bald eagles and turkey vultures and black vultures in North America
Yeah.
or North Carolina, because I know that bald eagles are very much scavengers as well.
Yes.
And do they take the cake when they fly in? Are the vultures gone?
Yes, so that is very true. Black bald eagles are also scavengers. They're not obligate scavengers, so they're not always going to hang out on carcasses, but bald eagles definitely are the victors. If they come in, they will absolutely scare turkey vultures away. Turkey vultures are way too timid for that. Black vultures, depends on how many black vultures there are as to whether they would scare away all the black vultures. So sometimes it's safety in numbers for black vultures there, but I have seen bald eagles scare away multiple vultures from a carcass. And sometimes they will eat harmoniously, but if a vulture gets in the way of the bald eagle, then the bald eagle is like, none of that. Time for you to go.
Okay, then same question about the bald eagle and the California condor, because
Oh,
the
mhm.
lead is impacting the California condor so much. The
Yeah.
bald eagles must not be. I know that bald eagles get exposed to lead
Yes.
from
So
bullets
I'd
and
say
lead shot.
it's an issue for bald eagles too, lead poisoning in bald eagles, absolutely. I don't think that they come into contact too often. So I don't know for sure about that. California condors are bigger than bald eagles
Yeah.
are. But I don't know their temperament as far as if who would win that argument there. But the California condors do eat in social groups, so there would be typically more of them. That might be enough. I don't know. It's a good question.
If we wait for those that are still on, I got Jeff's photo. I could share it really quick before we
Awesome.
hang
Yeah,
up
let
for
me
the night. And I'll
stop my
still
share.
include it.
Yeah, I was just fixing to ask you, did you get it?
I just got it. So let me see if I can share it. This will be our little nightcap.
Yes, perfect.
And then Kira will have comments, I'm sure. All right, you seeing it?
Oh, wow. Yeah. Okay. So the really big dark
Right
one,
here?
that's
That's,
the cinereous vulture.
yeah, and that's a juvenile.
Yeah.
Wow.
They are big. And then the smallest one with the yellow face, that's the Egyptian vulture.
Right. Those are the two of the two of the
Yeah.
many Egyptian vultures I saw there. And I can't tell the species of the griffin because I can't see
Yeah.
it from the front.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. It's a griffin. That's all I can tell you. It's a griffin
Yeah,
vulture, but
yeah.
that's really cool.
Well, I'm glad to share that with everybody. It's
Yes.
that picture. I actually have it on my credit card.
I love it. I'm very jealous that you got to see that many vultures at
and, and
once.
and you would think that the place would smell to high heaven, like
Yeah.
a sewage um, septic sewage plant that I've been to many times in Roanoke
Hmm.
or Danville, and where they would smell, but this place did not smell at all. The vultures there would just consume the meat right
Hmm.
off of the animals. Just within a couple of hours, it would be stripped
Yeah,
bone,
it's
bare.
fast.
And so,
Yeah, I've seen videos of some vultures doing it in minutes. Like,
oh yes,
it's really impressive. Yeah. I did see another question come in about the difference between griffins. So griffins are the ones that have the kind of like the feathery collar. They have really long necks and that kind of feathery collar that they have there. So that's what the difference is with a griffin. And then it's big.
mm. And actually, if you're a history nut like me, and you see all the hieroglyphics in Egyptian tombs and the pyramids, and you
Mhm.
see the vultures, it's the Egyptian vultures that those hieroglyphics represent.
Yep.
Wow.
Very true.
That's a really cool
Awesome.
photo, Jeff. Thank you for sharing. I
Hmm.
don't know if
You're,
it's
Yes, thank you.
scale, but the
I'm glad
shrubs
to,
or what? That bird
the,
looks huge.
yeah,
Yeah,
it was,
cinereous vultures are big.
they are big, and I'm glad to share it with a
Yeah.
group. because I love vultures. I mean,
Me too.
it just ain't my day until I see a turkey vulture flying around.
I love it.
And I was at
Happy to know there are people like you.
I was at my one of my wife's cousins' farm this afternoon, and we went down to take some stuff to dump in a trash pile to let it decompose. And he showed me a carcass of a deer that was in the field, and he scared off 2 bald eagles off of it the other day. And he asked me, he said, "Did bald eagles eat carrion?" I said, "Yep, they sure do." And he said, "Well, I just scared 2 of them off the other day."
Yep.
Oh,
That's why lead poisoning is such an issue for
yeah.
eagles too. Yeah. Yeah. I did get to see cinereous vultures in Mongolia, and they are huge. I saw 20 of them on a carcass, and they're so big. It's really impressive.
They are that.
Yeah.
Well,
And Lapit-faced vultures are even bigger.
What's that?
Just crazy.
Yeah. Well, I enjoyed it, and thank you for your presentation. It was worth watching.
Good. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kyra. This was fantastic. If any of your other friends over at EENC would like to do a wildlife presentation, reach out to Brianna, reach out to myself. This was fantastic. So
Awesome.
excellent work.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
I love talking about vultures. Could do it all day.
So good.
Thanks
I'm
for coming,
going
Ethan.
now to go run outside. I just got a picture that you can see the northern lights again. So
What?
PSA to everyone if you want to
Okay.
go outside.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Well, good luck.
Okay, thanks.
Y'all have a great night, okay?
Bye, everybody.
See ya.
See ya.